Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I don't intend to talk too long, but I think this is a really important bill to talk to. And look, I recognise, and I think most people around here, that there are legitimately different views on this bill, and that's acceptable. We're a democracy. People think one way, other people think the other way. But having said that, as with much legislation introduced into this Assembly, I think we need to look at it from a point of view of policy balance. Policy balance. And when we look at that policy pendulum, sure, it can vary from the extreme left to the extreme right, neither of which may I say I follow. I think in developing policy and associated legislation, we need to take a common sense approach that reflects our community's expectation and desire, which I believe generally takes us towards the centre, And from my perspective, my decisions in this Assembly are strongly influenced by the views of the overwhelming majority of my electorate. Noting, of course, it's unrealistic to expect that we're ever going to get full 100% agreement. I don't see that happening. But you will get a majority saying this is the view of where we think we want to go. So before I get onto this bill, I want to reflect on the various reducing crime bills that we have introduced in our first year of government, including bail reform, minimum mandatory sentencing for assaulting frontline workers, increased police powers, etc. Now, I recall that we had views for and against the introductions of these bills, and that's legitimate. We're allowed to have it. Now, whilst I appreciate the concerns raised by those on the opposition benches who opposed the introduction of these bills, personally, I am confident that we had the support of the majority of Territorians to proceed, including those living in my electorate. Improved community safety was what they wanted. And I must admit, I think only the CLP was willing to generally act on this rather than ignoring them. So that's where we you might have a centre left, you might have a centre right, whatever, but I think it was the community expectation that drove us. And we were confident that what we were delivering was what the balance of the community wanted. And guess what, Madam Speaker? Here we are, just over 1 year since I got sworn into this Assembly along with others. I think it was the 15th of October last year. And the sun still comes up in the morning and sets in the evening. It hasn't been doom and gloom and gone because we've introduced what we believe the community wanted. We are going forward. And as I flagged in my response to the ministerial report on backing small business earlier today, I believe the majority of Territorians, and definitely those in my electorate of Karama, are feeling much more optimistic about the future of the Territory with the CLP government in power. They got a much better future. They can see it for their families and their kids going forward. And that, to me, is a good thing. That's a very good thing. So let's get to the bill itself, and let's reiterate. What does the bill do? And I'm going to quote this because I want to get it right. The bill does not remove protections from the Anti-Discrimination 1992, the Act, rather retains and expands upon the protections currently available under the Act. The amendments proposed by the bill are intended to enhance protection of vulnerable communities from hate speech and discrimination. Vulnerable communities consist of all people and groups with a protected attribute under the Act, which include, for example, race, religion, age and sex. The bill, first of all, amends the protection against vilification by simply replacing 3 words with another set of 3 words. So it replaces the words offend, insult, humiliate or intimidate with incites hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule of a person or group because of a protected attribute. The effect of this is that the protection is incitement-based rather than requiring a threshold of harm to be established. And I'm going to get back to the issue of offence later. And the bill inserts a new section to reintroduce an exemption for religious educational institutions operating in accordance with the doctrine of a particular religion to discriminate in the area of work on the ground of religious belief and activity, and in good faith to avoid offending the religious sensitivities of a reasonable person of the religion, a reasonable person. The exemption allows a religious educational institution to preference employing persons of the same religion and establish requirements of the conduct for persons employed in the workplace, but only where the elements of the religious doctrine are set out in written policy. Now, in my electorate and adjoining areas, I have a number of faith-based schools, including Catholic senior and primary schools and an Islamic college. Now, I believe these schools deserve the right to employ teachers and staff that share the values of their faith to deliver cohesive learning in line with the shared values of their own families. If I choose to send my child to a faith-based school, then I would expect that the faith-based school is going to share the values of why I'm sending them there. So if I'm a Catholic sending it to a Catholic school, I would hope that the Catholic values come through. If I'm Islamic and I'm sending to an Islamic school, I would hope that they would share the values of the Islamic faith with those. And every other faith-based too. And I know there's Lutherans and there's a whole range of other schools as well. It is important to note the religious exemption recognises that religion is a protected attribute under the Act, and that the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion or belief can at times intersect with other fundamental rights, such as the right to non-discrimination and equality. Where fundamental rights intersect, a balance must be struck to preserve both the rights to the highest degree possible. That is what the religious exemption seeks to do. So the amendment to the vilification prohibition responds to concerns that prohibition based on offensive behaviour overly limits the freedom of speech, while the incitement-based protection is better understood by the community. Now, I am a strong supporter of freedom of speech, and it really does come, it's part of my DNA. I think people should be able to speak. I don't have to agree with what they say. I can absolutely be against what they say, but I fundamentally respect their right to say it. And I think we've got to be careful where we go on limiting that. Now, the amendment to the vilification prohibition makes it clear where the right to freedom of speech is limited, being where conduct such as hate speech is capable of inciting hatred, serious contempt or severe ridicule of the person or group with a protected attribute. The vilification prohibition continues to protect against hate speech and retains the mechanism in which a person or group may seek recourse against an individual or conduct that constitutes vilification under the Act. So there are protections. We have not removed all these protections. They are there. We've just changed the emphasis slightly. As I said, I think we're in the centre. Now, I know in the development of this bill, I know the Attorney-General has been lobbied by very many groups. Some want us to go harder, and that's their right. They've come and said, no, you're not going far enough, you've got to go much further. And we said, hang on, I'm not too sure about that, we're going to come back. Some don't want us to do anything. We say, well, hang on, you're not listening to what we're getting as the majority feedback to us. We do need to respond to the community. And I think what we've got here, and it may not be perfect, I'm sure, and we can discuss this in consideration in detail, but I think we have struck the middle. And that is a good thing. We're not going to get agreement on all sides, but I think we've taken a good middle course, and I understand why we're trying to get the freedom of speech back in there and also religious rights for faith-based schools. Now, let me finish off on that concept of offence and free speech. I mentioned also in my earlier speech that I did a mobile office at MLA. That's okay, I sat down there, set up in the morning, fine. A lot of people came up and said, hello Brian, good to see you and whatever, and they do that. However, there was one car came up, he came up Darwin Street, turning into Malack Crescent, just where I was, and he had a trailer on the thing, and he had the window down, and I've just set up. He said, hey, are you getting paid to stand there? I said, yes. And he said, F off. Okay. Now, was I offended? No. Others may have been, because it was his right to express his view. I may not like him to say it, but he was entitled to say his view. And I will stand by his right to say that view. I wish he'd stopped to talk to me. That would have been good. And as one of my colleagues said, what I should have said is, I hope you have the day you deserve, sir, and just let him go. But that's okay. So it does remind me of the old saying, you know, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names can never hurt me. Now, some people may take some of these hard. Well, you've got to learn to deal with that. But it is the right of people to say. So let me reassure everyone that when this bill gets passed today, which I'm sure it will, there may be changes, I'm not going to preempt what's going to happen. Yes, some people in this House may not support it, but I'm confident that the majority of Territorians will support enhancements to free speech and religious rights. I think they see that as a common sense approach of where we're going. Now, this bit I couldn't resist. And look, I know the member for Guadja was very passionate, but he did get me thinking there. Finally, I listened to the concerns raised by the member for Guadja when he didn't like the idea of people being able to make jokes, and I say again jokes, that touched on nationality, sex or race. Well, Madam Speaker, if that is the case, we may as well get rid of all our fantastic comedians who have entertained us over the years, including Billy Connolly, Dave Allen, Spike Milligan, and of course the magnificent John Cleese. I remember so many Irish jokes in my time, don't you worry about that. And so to all our Irishmen, a Scotsman and an Englishman walk into the bar jokes, they have to stop. Surely not, surely not. But just on that, let me go back to the magnificent John Cleese, because I'm going to finish with a quote from him. And he says, here's a definition of wokeism. There are people just sitting there who are deliberately waiting for the thrill of being offended. That's what he said. I'll say it again. Here's the definition of wokeism. There are people just sitting there who are deliberately waiting for the thrill of being offended. Well, I get offended sometimes, but I'm not going to take it too hard. You know, I can move on. I hope other people do too. But this bill is really, I think, in the middle ground. It's in the centre. It's an important bill. It touches on an important topic, and I commend the bill. Thank you.